Hello, Virgo. Wow, this energy feels incredibly deep already. Someone here has been carrying thoughts and feelings they never fully expressed, and honestly, it feels like the weight of that silence is becoming harder for them to ignore. This person may have convinced themselves that time would make everything easier. That distance would help them move on. That keeping their emotions hidden was somehow the safest choice. But something has changed. Because the more space they created, the more they found themselves thinking about you. The more they tried to stay quiet, the louder their heart became. And here's the question. Why are they still thinking about this connection after all this time? Why does your energy continue to stay with them when they have tried so hard to focus on everything else? Okay, because I don't think this is just about unfinished words. I think this is about someone slowly realizing that the truth they've been avoiding may be impossible to avoid any longer. There is a lot of reflection here, a lot of inner conflict, and it feels like someone is finally starting to face what they've been feeling all along. So let's take a look at the cards and see what wants to come through. Honestly, Virgo, the first thing that catches my attention is how much energy this person has spent trying not to feel what they feel. I don't think they expected this connection to stay with them for so long. At one point, they genuinely believed that if they stayed quiet long enough, if they created enough distance, everything would eventually fade. The emotions, the memories, the questions, all of it. But as I look at the Hermit card, I keep feeling drawn into this image of someone sitting alone with their own thoughts, trying to convince themselves that they are fine, trying to convince themselves that they have everything under control. You know, the interesting thing is that people can hide from other people for a very long time. They can stay busy. They can distract themselves. They can throw themselves into work, responsibilities, routines, and endless obligations. But eventually there comes a moment when there is nothing left to distract them from themselves. And that's what this feels like, because the silence they created was supposed to bring relief. Instead, it created space. And in that space, they started hearing their own heart more clearly. Wow, I feel like some of them are replaying old conversations over and over again. Not because they want to, because they can't seem to stop. Little moments they thought were insignificant suddenly feel important. Things you said months ago, the way you looked at them, the way you understood them without needing long explanations. The way you seemed to see through walls they spent years building. As the Four of Swords appears here, I get this feeling of somebody retreating from the world for a while, not necessarily physically, emotionally, mentally, trying to process everything they have been carrying. And honestly, Virgo, this person may not even be talking about these feelings with anyone around them. This feels private, very private, like they have been having entire conversations with themselves that nobody else knows about. Questions they cannot answer, truths they cannot ignore. You know, I keep hearing this energy of someone saying, why am I still thinking about this? Why does this still matter? Why can't I just move on? And every time they ask those questions, the answer feels closer than they want it to be. Because what they are beginning to realize is that this was never just another connection. This was never something that disappeared simply because time passed. The Six of Cups keeps pulling me toward memories, not dramatic memories, not necessarily life-changing moments, just meaningful ones, the kind that quietly stay with you, the kind that return unexpectedly while you're driving somewhere, working, trying to fall asleep. The kind of memories that arrive without permission and leave you staring at the ceiling, wondering why your chest suddenly feels heavy. And I think that's exactly what has been happening. The more they tried to move forward, the more pieces of you kept showing up. A song, a place, a phrase, a feeling. Something keeps bringing them back. Something keeps reminding them. And honestly, Virgo, I don't think that realization has been comfortable. Because once somebody starts noticing how often another person lives in their thoughts, it becomes difficult to pretend those feelings aren't there. That's where the Nine of Swords energy feels so strong. Not because this person is being punished, not because something terrible is happening. It feels more like someone standing face to face with emotions they have postponed for far too long. There is regret here, reflection, a lot of late-night thinking, a lot of wondering whether they handled things the right way, whether silence helped anything, whether distance solved anything. And what keeps coming through is this sense that the answers they once felt certain about no longer feel certain at all. Okay, because I think there was a time when this person believed staying quiet was easier, safer, less complicated. But the longer they remain in that silence, the more complicated everything becomes inside of them. The feelings don't disappear. The questions don't disappear. The connection doesn't disappear. Instead, it sits there quietly waiting to be acknowledged. And I feel like that acknowledgement is beginning, not loudly, not dramatically. More like somebody slowly lowering their defenses and allowing themselves to admit something they have been avoiding, something their heart may have known for quite some time. And the more honest they become with themselves, the harder it becomes to keep pretending that none of this matters. Because beneath all the thinking, beneath all the analyzing, beneath all the distance, there is a truth they are starting to see more clearly than before. And for some reason, Virgo, that truth feels like it has been waiting patiently for them to finally look at it directly. You know, what keeps standing out to me is that this person doesn't seem overwhelmed by what they feel as much as they are overwhelmed by what they never said. Because there is a difference. One is emotion, the other is unfinished truth. And honestly, Virgo, unfinished truth has a way of becoming heavier with time. The Seven of Swords is sitting here, and I can't help but feel like there are conversations this person rehearsed 100 times in their head, but never actually had. Not because they didn't know what to say, because saying it would have made everything real. As long as certain things remained unspoken, they could keep pretending they still had control over the situation. They could avoid accountability. They could avoid vulnerability. They could avoid facing how much this connection truly affected them. But something about that strategy isn't working anymore. I keep getting the image of somebody carrying a suitcase that becomes heavier every mile they walk. At first, they tell themselves it's manageable. They can handle it. It's fine. But eventually they realize they're exhausted from carrying something they should have opened a long time ago. And that's exactly what this energy feels like. There are explanations they never gave, feelings they never clarified, moments where they let confusion speak for them instead of honesty. And every time they chose silence, another layer was added to the weight they were already carrying. The Eight of Swords feels incredibly personal here, not because someone else trapped them, because they came trapped inside their own thoughts, inside their own fears, inside their own assumptions. And wow, some of those assumptions may have convinced them that speaking up would only make things worse, that telling the truth would create conflict, that being vulnerable would leave them exposed, so they kept postponing it. A few more days, a few more weeks, a little more time. And somehow that delay became part of the pattern itself. But what I'm noticing is that their inner dialogue is changing. The questions they're asking themselves aren't the same anymore. Instead of asking, what if I say something? They're beginning to ask, what happens if I never do? And that question feels much harder for them to ignore. Because for the first time, they are starting to understand that silence has consequences too. Sometimes people think doing nothing protects them. But doing nothing can create its own kind of pain, its own kind of distance, its own kind of misunderstanding. The Judgment card keeps pulling my attention back over and over again. Not dramatically, not in a way that feels loud. More like a quiet realization arriving after a very long period of resistance. A realization that keeps showing up no matter how many times they try to push it away. And the realization feels simple. Painfully simple. The truth does not become easier to carry just because it stays hidden. In fact, it often becomes heavier. Honestly, I think this person is beginning to see that clarity is not something they want anymore. It's something they need. Because uncertainty has been affecting them just as much as it has affected this connection. The guessing, the wondering, the unfinished conversations. None of it feels sustainable to them anymore. And that's where the Page of Swords energy feels so interesting. Because I don't see somebody rushing forward. I see somebody observing, watching, thinking carefully, trying to understand the best way to approach something they have avoided for a very long time. Almost like they are standing at the edge of an important conversation, looking at every possible outcome before taking a step. You know, this person may appear calm on the outside, collected, reasonable, in control. But internally there is so much movement happening, so much reconsideration, so much reflection. Because the version of them that wanted to stay silent is slowly being challenged by the version of them that wants honesty. And those two sides don't seem to agree anymore. One side still wants protection. The other wants truth. One side wants distance. The other wants clarity. One side says, keep it to yourself. The other keeps whispering, this cannot stay hidden forever. And the more that whisper grows louder, the harder it becomes for them to keep carrying everything alone. What feels different here, Virgo, is that this person is no longer looking at you through the lens of their fears. They're starting to look at you as you actually are. And wow, that realization seems to be changing something inside of them. Because while they've been sorting through their own thoughts, life hasn't stood still for you. You kept moving. You kept growing. You kept rebuilding parts of yourself that nobody else could rebuild for you. And I don't think they expected to notice that as strongly as they do. The Queen of Pentacles immediately catches my attention. not because of what you're doing, because of how you're carrying yourself. There is something about your energy that feels calmer than before, more grounded, more self-contained. You don't feel like someone waiting around for answers anymore. You feel like someone creating their own. And honestly, that seems to be one of the things they admire most right now. You know, sometimes people assume they will always have access to someone's energy. They assume that person's attention will always be there, their patience, their understanding, their willingness to keep the door open. But something about your energy feels different, not closed, not cold, just centered. Like you've stopped chasing certainty from outside yourself, and this person notices it more than they may ever admit. The Empress is appearing here, and the feeling I get isn't about appearance or status, it's about presence. The kind of presence that comes from someone who has spent time healing. Someone who has learned how to nurture their own peace. Someone who no longer measures their value through another person's actions. And that's what keeps surprising them, because the version of you they once knew may have carried questions, may have searched for explanations, may have wanted clarity. But the energy they're sensing now feels far more confident in itself. I think part of them expected you to remain exactly where they left you emotionally, not because they wanted to hurt you, because people often underestimate how much growth can happen when they aren't looking. And while they were focused on their own struggles, their own confusion, their own fears, you were evolving steadily, without needing anyone's permission. That's why the strength card feels so powerful here. Not loud strength, not aggressive strength. The kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself. The kind that comes from surviving things nobody fully understands. The kind that allows someone to keep moving forward even when their heart has questions. And I feel like this person is beginning to realize how much strength you've actually shown. Because from their perspective, it would have been easier for you to become bitter. It would have been easier for you to stay stuck. It would have been easier for you to let disappointment define your story. But that's not what they see. They see resilience. They see grace. They see someone who kept choosing themselves over and over again. Honestly, there is a deep respect forming here. A respect that feels different from attraction, different from longing, different from curiosity. Because respect grows when someone witnesses another person's character. And I think that's exactly what is happening. They're witnessing your character. The way you've handled challenges, the way you've carried yourself, the way you've continued building your life even when certain answers never arrived. The King of Pentacles brings in an interesting energy. Because I almost feel this person asking themselves a difficult question. Not about how they feel. They already know they're feeling something. The question feels more like, can I meet this version of Virgo where they are now? Can I show up with the same maturity? Can I bring the same stability? Because the more they observe you, the more they realize this connection isn't only about emotions. It's about growth. It's about becoming the kind of person who can stand beside someone they genuinely respect. And that realization seems to humble them. Wow. For some of you, they may be looking back at old assumptions they had about you and realizing how incomplete those assumptions were. Maybe they underestimated your strength. Maybe they underestimated your wisdom. Maybe they thought they understood you completely. Only to discover there were layers they never took the time to appreciate. And there's something almost beautiful about that, because this doesn't feel like somebody putting you on a pedestal. It feels like somebody finally seeing you clearly, not through projections, not through expectations, not through fear, just seeing you, the real you, the person you've become, the person you're still becoming. And the more clearly they see that person, the more difficult it becomes for them to ignore how much your presence has impacted their life. Something about this energy feels less focused on what happened and more focused on what needs to be said. And honestly, Virgo, that's a very different place for someone to be, because for a long time, this person seemed more comfortable analyzing situations than participating in them, more comfortable observing than expressing, more comfortable thinking than speaking. But the cards on the table feel restless, almost like the silence itself is becoming uncomfortable. The Page of Swords keeps drawing my attention to somebody who is watching carefully, listening carefully, measuring every word before it leaves their mouth. And wow, I don't think this person wants to have a casual conversation. This feels much deeper than that. They've been carrying thoughts that never found a place to land. Thoughts that stayed trapped between intention and action. You know, some people struggle to speak because they don't know what they feel. This feels different. This feels like someone who knows exactly what they feel but worries about what happens after they say it out loud. Because once the truth is spoken, it becomes real. Once honesty enters the room, there is no hiding behind assumptions anymore. No hiding behind distance. No hiding behind misunderstandings. And I think that's what makes this feel so vulnerable for them. The Knight of Cups appears, and immediately I feel somebody rehearsing conversations in their mind. Not once, not twice, over and over. Imagining different outcomes, different reactions, different possibilities. Trying to find the perfect words. Trying to make sure they don't say the wrong thing. Trying to explain emotions they've spent so much time keeping under control. There is something almost touching about it. Because beneath all that careful thinking, I don't see manipulation. I see nervousness. I see somebody who genuinely cares about how their words will be received. Someone who understands that certain conversations matter. And because they matter, they want to approach them carefully. The interesting thing is that this person seems less afraid of being rejected than they are of being misunderstood. That keeps coming through very strongly. It's like they want to say, please understand where I was coming from. Please understand what was happening inside me. Please understand that there were things I didn't know how to explain, not as an excuse. More as an attempt to finally remove the fog that has surrounded this connection. Because confusion has become exhausting. For them, for you, for everyone involved. The Eight of Wands carries an energy that feels impossible to ignore. Not rushed, not reckless, but moving. And I think that's significant, because the person I'm seeing here doesn't want to stay stuck in the same emotional place forever. They don't want every interaction to be filtered through old misunderstandings. They don't want every memory to remain unfinished. Something inside them is pushing for movement, pushing for expression, pushing for honesty. And honestly, that push seems stronger than their fear. Not because the fear disappeared. The fear is still there. I can feel it. Fear of vulnerability, fear of judgment, fear of hearing something they may not be prepared for. But there is another feeling growing alongside it. A feeling that says, if I keep avoiding this, nothing changes. And that feeling seems to be gaining ground. The Judgment card is sitting here with a very quiet kind of intensity. Not dramatic, not explosive, just clear. Like someone standing in front of a mirror and finally deciding they are tired of running from what they see. Because there comes a point where people become exhausted from carrying unfinished conversations inside their hearts. Exhausted from wondering, exhausted from imagining, exhausted from postponing. And this person feels close to that point. Wow. The strongest thing I'm picking up is that they don't want perfection anymore. They want truth. They don't seem focused on saying everything perfectly. They seem focused on saying something real, something honest, something that reflects who they are rather than who they have been pretending to be. And as that realization settles in, I can't help but notice how much softer their energy feels. Less defensive, less guarded, more willing to let their walls down. Because beneath all the thinking, all the caution, and all the silence, there appears to be a growing desire to be understood for the first time in a very long while. What keeps pulling my attention forward is the feeling that this person is standing in a place they haven't stood before. Not because the circumstances around them suddenly changed, because something inside them did. And honestly, Virgo, inner change can be far more powerful than anything happening on the outside. The Wheel of Fortune appears here, and the energy feels almost surreal, like somebody looking back over a long period of time and realizing they are no longer seeing things through the same eyes. You know, sometimes people spend so much time focusing on what they want that they never stop to ask why they want it, what they're afraid of, what they're protecting, what they're avoiding. This person seems to be having that kind of realization, a deeper realization, one that reaches beyond surface emotions, because what once felt complicated is beginning to look surprisingly simple, and what once felt simple is beginning to reveal layers they never noticed before. Wow, there is a sense that certain priorities are shifting, not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily. The things that once demanded all of their attention don't seem to hold the same weight anymore. And the things they once pushed aside are becoming impossible to overlook. That shift feels important because it is forcing them to reevaluate what truly matters, who truly matters. The Death card enters, and immediately I feel resistance giving way to acceptance. Not perfect acceptance, not complete certainty, but acceptance nonetheless. The kind that happens when someone finally stops arguing with reality. When they stop trying to force themselves to feel something different, or stop trying to convince themselves that they don't care. There is a quiet surrender here, and I don't mean surrender in a weak sense. I mean surrender in the sense of honesty. The kind of honesty that says, this is where I am, this is what I feel, this is what I can no longer deny. Because for a long time, part of this person's identity may have been built around avoidance. Avoiding difficult conversations, avoiding uncomfortable emotions, avoiding vulnerability, avoiding change. But those patterns don't seem to fit anymore. And when old patterns stop fitting, people are often left with a choice. They can continue repeating what no longer serves them, or they can become someone new. I feel like this person is somewhere in between those two versions of themselves. Not fully the person they used to be, not fully the person they are becoming. Standing in that space can feel uncomfortable, messy, uncertain, but it can also be incredibly important, because that's often where growth happens. The World card creates this fascinating sense of perspective, almost like somebody stepping back and looking at the bigger picture for the first time. Not just focusing on individual moments, not just focusing on mistakes, not just focusing on fears, looking at the entire journey. And as they do, I think they're beginning to understand something. This connection was never only about feelings. It was also about lessons, about reflection, about becoming more aware of themselves, more aware of their choices, more aware of the impact they have on other people. Honestly, I don't think they're measuring success the same way anymore. At one point, success may have looked like staying in control, staying detached, keeping everything neatly organized, keeping his emotions at a safe distance. But that definition seems to be changing. Because what good is control if it costs authenticity? What good is protection if it creates loneliness? Those questions feel very present. The chariot appears, and suddenly I notice movement where there used to be hesitation. Not reckless movement, not impulsive movement, intentional movement, purposeful movement, like somebody finally deciding they are tired of standing still. And what's interesting is that this doesn't feel like a decision based entirely on emotion. It feels mature, thoughtful, grounded, almost like they've spent enough time analyzing every angle and are beginning to understand that eventually decisions must be lived, not just studied. Okay. This person may still have concerns. They may still have questions. They may still have moments of doubt. But doubt no longer seems to be driving the vehicle. Something else is taking the wheel. Something quieter. Something stronger. A growing understanding of what truly deserves their energy. A growing willingness to stop letting fear make every decision. And the more they sit with that understanding, the more it feels like an old chapter inside them is gently coming to a close, creating space for choices that look very different from the ones they would have made before. There is a softness entering this reading that wasn't here before, Virgo, not because everything suddenly feels easy, not because all the questions disappeared. It feels softer because this person seems less interested in protecting their pride and more interested in revealing their truth. And honestly, that may be one of the biggest changes of all. The King of Cups immediately draws me towards someone who has spent a very long time feeling more than they allowed themselves to show. You know, some people wear their emotions openly. Others become experts at hiding them. They learn how to smile while carrying sadness, how to stay composed while feeling overwhelmed, how to appear unaffected when something has touched them deeply. This person feels like one of those people. The kind who convinced themselves that if they stayed in control of their emotions, they would somehow stay in control of the outcome. But life doesn't always work that way. And what keeps coming through is a growing desire to stop speaking through silence, to stop communicating through absence, to stop expecting other people to understand things that were never fully expressed. Wow. I almost feel them sitting alone, imagining a conversation they wish they had months ago, not because they want to rewrite the past, because they finally understand what they should have said, words they swallowed, feelings they minimized, truths they kept hidden behind careful distance. And the strange thing is that those unspoken words seem more alive now than ever before. The Three of Pentacles feels incredibly meaningful here, because this isn't the energy of someone who wants to win an argument. This isn't someone trying to prove a point. This feels like somebody realizing that genuine connection requires participation, effort, communication, honesty, a willingness to meet another person halfway. And I think they're beginning to understand that relationships cannot survive on assumptions. They cannot grow through silence alone. At some point, people have to show up as themselves, not as the version they think they should be, not as the version they present to the world, the real version, the vulnerable version, the human version. There's something very humble about this energy. Almost like somebody accepting that they don't have all the answers, accepting that they made mistakes, accepting that certain choices created distance they never truly wanted. And rather than running from those realizations, they seem willing to sit with them, to learn from them, to carry them differently. The Four of Wands creates a feeling that is difficult to ignore, not because of grand gestures, not because of fantasy, because it feels safe, comfortable, familiar. And as I sit with this energy, I keep sensing that whenever this person thinks about genuine peace, your presence somehow finds its way into that picture. Not because you're perfect, not because you're expected to solve their problems, because there is something about your energy that feels real to them. Something steady, something grounding, something that remains in their mind long after other distractions fade away. Honestly, I think that realization surprised them, because they may have spent a lot of time chasing things that looked exciting, things that looked important, things that looked impressive, only to discover that what their heart values most feels much simpler, much quieter, much more authentic. The Lover's card appears, and what stands out to me isn't romance alone, it's choice. A conscious choice, a deliberate choice. A choice made with awareness rather than avoidance. Because for so much of this reading, we've been watching someone wrestle with themselves, question themselves, challenge themselves. But this energy feels different. It feels like someone beginning to understand that eventually every person reaches a moment where they must decide what kind of story they want to keep living. The story built on fear or the story built on truth. And while I don't feel certainty about every outcome, I do feel sincerity. A sincerity that wasn't fully present before. A sincerity that wants to be seen, wants to be understood, wants to say, this is who I am. This is what I feel. This is what I should have told you a long time ago. And as these cards settle on the table, there is one feeling that remains stronger than anything else. Not urgency, not pressure, not perfection. Just a quiet desire for honesty to finally have a place in this connection where it can be heard. And Virgo, if there's one thing that keeps echoing throughout this reading, it's the feeling that some truths can only stay hidden for so long. Sometimes silence protects us. Sometimes it gives us space to think. But sometimes silence simply reveals what the heart has been trying to say all along. Whatever part of this story resonated with you, take only what feels right for your journey and leave the rest behind. Trust your own wisdom. Trust your own intuition, and most importantly, continue choosing yourself the way you've been learning to do. That's all I've got for you for this reading. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Your energy, your presence, and your support mean more than you know. Take gentle care of yourself. Keep moving forward in your own beautiful way. And I'll see you again very soon. Okay? Bye, Virgo.